Welcome,
Yes.
Varuna. Thank you very much for joining us today at TestingUy. My name is Ursula Bartram, and I want to thank you to share your knowledge with us. So go ahead with our presentation.
Thanks, Ursula. Hello, everyone. Morning, afternoon, evening, whichever time zone you are in. I'm Varuna Srivastava, a lead quality analyst at ThoughtWorks, and have been in test automation for 12 years now. My primary role is to drive testing and automation for the product. And I do coach people and the team around the best practices of the automation and how to ship your product in the most leaner manner. I do write sometimes. You could find my writings on Medium on the srivastavaruna.medium.com. And yeah, for any conversation, any connects, please feel free to drop a note to Vibrant Tester, or you could connect me over a LinkedIn on Varuna Srivastava. So today I'm here to advocate around the design patterns in the test automation. Fruitful design patterns in the test automation. I'm just finding it difficult, like my slides are not going. Just give me a second. Yeah. So let's quickly scan through the agenda before we take a deep dive into the session. What we are going to cover here today is what are design patterns? What are the different types of design patterns? What does it consist of? And why design patterns in the test automation? Fruitful. So why fruitful? Why not best or a good for the design patterns? In my opinion, a best and good is the contextual. It could be based on the context of the team and also the application under your test. So here the fruitful is while you are designing your test automation framework, how productive you are and how productive you can be while you are using when you use a design patterns. So I've seen people also around who are the programmers or tester. They might be writing codes, they might be designing a multiple frameworks without knowing what exactly design patterns are. And there is no harm in that. Unknowingly, we don't know the patterns, but we all follow the patterns in some or the other way in a software design, either in a software design or in our real life. So what design patterns are? It's a solution to a commonly occurring problem in a software design. It's not only for the software development process, it is as equal and as important as for your test automation code base. Why important for test automation code base? As this would be the code base which is going to test your production code, which is going to be your shippable code. So we will touch based upon what does this pattern consist of. Before I share my experience on the design patterns. So what does design pattern consist of? A pattern has an intent. What is your problem? And what is the solution you would like to get out of it? What are the different possible approaches and solutions you can make it possible? That's where your motivation comes into it. Structure. How would you structure your classes? How would you structure your interfaces when you're talking around the design patterns? Now, not the least one, the code. So the beauty of the design patterns are once you know the concepts around design patterns, while you are switching from one language to another, you don't have to learn again the patterns. It is something you know the concepts and you would apply it whichever language you want to or whichever language you are using it. So idea behind this, get the concepts of the pattern out and apply it when and wherever needed in your test automation framework. Now we talked lots on the patterns and all. So let's quickly have on the chat window, how many of you have used any of the design patterns in test automation or you are currently using it? So we'll look into a chat and see what patterns you folks are using it or would have heard about the patterns. Anyone? Right, Srijit, page object. Anything else? Singleton, cool, yeah. Page factory, nice, enhanced version of page object. Anyone, anything? Feel free to pour your what you have used or what you're currently using it. We'll give a couple of seconds here. Facade, right, Diego? Okay, Ariel, screenplay. Let's discuss towards the end what the screenplay recorder you're mostly talking around those. Anyone? Okay, so I see that you folks are aware of patterns and you're talking around the different types of patterns. So we'll look into a few commonly used patterns in test automation framework. Page object, as Srijit mentioned, the page object now. So what is page object? It drives the functionality of that. It is where your user actions gets invoked. What are, as a user, what all operations I'm performing and how would you relate that to your page object? Singleton, very well. Builder, composite, and the one data provider. Last but not the least, the most important one which I felt, which is if you used it wisely, it helps really well in scaling your framework and it helps in a lot of reusability. So let's look into a page object pattern. So what does the page object pattern does? It reduces your code duplication. It helps in scaling, easy maintenance eventually. Starting, you have to put a lot of efforts on designing the page objects, but eventually it comes with easy maintenance. It simulates the user action. As a user, what all the actions I'm performing on a page is what we'll cover in our page objects. Page snippets. This is something which I've seen that people eventually see that if I'm on a home page, that home page would be my page object. And we forget about the snippets of the pages. So there, if you see this is some test store, some retail website here. Now, if I want to purchase here something, this is a home page, but your page object, to make it reusable, to make it maintainable, what is the common actions should have a different snippets of this page. So I could have this as a navigation. This could be my left page. So even on a home page, I could have a different snippets of my page. If there is a search, that would be one of my different page, even though it is a home page. But in designing my page object in my automation framework, what will I keep? I'll keep that as a different snippets. A simple example of searching on Amazon. Suppose I would like to search for a book on Amazon or suppose a Kindle. This is the home screen of the Amazon. But you see here, this is again one more snippet. it's my header section, which could be reusable across the application and across the pages. So once designed, I could be just making the changes to one common place of my header instead of making changes to my home page, to my search results page, or to my search item page. So once I have designed my header, if my pointers are here, then that could be reused for all. These are the common components which could be reused across my entire code base. So as we have seen that page object gives you isolation, like what your user action gets performed. But it's never isolated. It's never used alone. So there are different patterns which gets embedded while you are designing your framework using a page objects. The one which is here is the builder pattern. So what does the builder pattern does is, suppose I as a user wants to define a user object where a user has an address and a payment. So address itself is a complex object and payment itself is an object. And under those, on top of it, we have a user as an object. So how would you construct the entire object while you are designing your framework? So builder pattern helps in this. It's a way to construct your complex objects. It also helps in creating immutable classes with a large set of attributes. So your address itself would have 20 different attributes altogether. Your payment itself will have a different attributes, and your user profile will have a set of other attributes based on different geographical locations, based on different based on different languages. Your payments and address attributes might also differ. So builder helps in reusing the same construction code while representing your various objects. So suppose you want to book a train ticket from London to Paris. Now some users would only give their origin and destination and would like to see what the tickets are. Some would be very specific on the timings. So while you are constructing your journey request, you have two as a mandatory field and others are optional. So you can reuse the same code construction object, and based on that, you will add more whatever is your need. Some people would like to have also see what's the infant charges. And I want to look into a one-way journey. But your base is your origin and destination is something which is your mandatory. And on top of it, you will build your entire object. So it really helps in complex objects, and we were going to see how it helps once we go in, see in our code snippets. So page object, it talks around the page. If you could see this, what are the snippets, it's mostly what I'm trying to here is, I'm trying to get a search results for a one-way journey with my journey details. We'll look into details on the journey details, what journey details consist of, what entity it is, and how are we building it. As we were talking around the builders, this is one of those like not so complex, but still you could see the number of parameters in the constructor what we are passing it. And it could just increase based on our need, based on our requirements of the application under a test. And this is again the same part here, where your builder is only with your mandatory attributes. So now let's look into a code base to see what the page object patterns are and what the builder patterns are. And we'll see them both together. So as a user, what I'm doing here is, so this page object patterns, it could be applied irrespective of whether you're using a BDD or whatever framework you would like to use it. So here, I'm just trying to search whether would be able to search for a given search term. Why the page object? Because I'm hiding the low level complexity of the business. What I'm trying to do here is, as an end user, what would like would be my search criteria or my search terms. So if my scenario would be search for a given search term, then user should navigate to a search page with whatever the search term list, right? Let's look into one of the tests here. So if you see here this test, what does this test does? You're on a home page and you're trying to search for, so you could imagine any of your portal where you want to search for your bus tickets or a train tickets or even a flight tickets. So you were trying to search for a journey here, and searching for a journey here, what does this returns? This returns to me a next action. So this is the most important part of the page object, that each method in your page, so we came from a test to a page class, and each method in your page should invoke what the next action is. The methods in the pages should never be void, or you can say it, we should avoid the void in the pages, as what I'm doing is I'm doing a user action. So suppose I'm on a home page and I just enter a origin. This is from where I want to start my journey. Then also, if you could see here, this is the poor implementation of the page object. If I just enter a origin here, I'm still at the home page, right? So it should still return me here a home page. And how will you return it? With return this. So any method in your pages should have what are the user actions and which page you are. Now, as you would have seen in the snippets of the images, that on a home page itself, I do have a search bar, but my search results are a different page altogether. So while you are designing your pattern, think on the snippets of the pages. Don't just see that this is my blank home page and this is how I will design my objects. Your object should be a logical object model, and that is something which is called as your page object. Now, only thing where I would think of returning a void here in this, suppose on a home page, I want to get a count of how many items are there in the nav bar. That is something which I would return there as an int, that this is what the count is on the home page. Other way, if you see here, this is the poor implementation. We should always return an instance where we are in our page. And that will help when we see next how we could invoke, how we could use a page factory and a chain of invocation. So now, as a home page, I was able to search for one-way journey with a search results page. Now, what have you searched for? In my test, there is nothing from my test you could see that where I'm going, what is my origin, what is my destination, and where is that origin and destination is. This is where I'm building it. So as we talked earlier, this is what my journey details is, which is where we have a required and an optional fields. Now, I want to construct this journey based on what my needs are. And there comes the builder in the picture. So origin and destination as a mandatory one. This is what my journey details would look like. If I want to have only a one way, this is how my journey details would look like. I have just added one attribute, but I am reusing this as my base, origin and destination. Next one would be how many number of adults. So you could construct an object, construct the builder based on your needs and what your test intent is. And this could be parameterized, or if you want, you could have a different ways of invoking these functions. But once your default builder is set here, and this builder is what is there here in the journey details. So some people, if you could have noticed in the first test, the very first test, I had just given a default builder where I'm just setting everything, which is not needed at all for my test. And the test is not readable also. Like if you come tomorrow and see where I'm going, what is my origin, what is my destination, until unless you know what is this journey details object, you would not be able to know where I'm going. So that's not a good practice here. You always have that origin and destination. We could have a default constructor, but the intent of test would vary. So your origin and destination will change, and that way you could use a different patterns on how would you manage your data. That will cover your intent. So this was mostly the builders and the page object builder tests. Now let's look into it. What are the different advantage have you, if you would have noticed or seen while using a page objects? So the very first thing which comes with my experience is it respects the test parameter. It validates the business requirements and your user actions. So your user journeys and your personas are getting validated, and your test parameter is being respected. Your unit test, your integration test, and other remains the same. It repeats, builds on the principle, do not repeat yourself. So page object, like once you have defined your search object, that is something which you would be using it throughout your journey test. You don't have to repeat it for each module. So you have, that's where your, how would you classify and how would you abstract your modules becomes very important, that how much you want a reusability. And again, how abstraction, that your concerns are different. When I see the test, I should be only saying that I want, as a user, I would like to go from London to Paris. Behind the low level entities, what operations you are performing, that is behind the hood. But for me, if I have to get this test cases reviewed by my product owners, it should be very intent, and it separates what the concerns should be separate. Now let's look into it, chain of invocation patterns. This is something which is really important, as we don't want to instantiate our object again and again. And as we have seen also, that each pages should return something. What it should return here? Each page should return a set of an action. So chain of invocation is like, you don't need to instantiate the object like you did on the home page dot enter origin. Now home page dot enter destination. Now home page dot submit button. How could you think through it? How could you chain this set of events while you are writing your test? And there only comes like your pages should return, your methods of your pages should not return a word. So it helps in chaining, and chaining also helps you visualizing your user actions, what is happening on your page. And when you see your test method, it is more like without repeating your instance of the object, your code looks more prettier. In a longer run, it helps in while you are scaling your framework. So suppose I joined your team newly and I am not aware of your framework, but just doing this homepage dot, I would see what are the different types of methods this homepage is returning. I could enter a username, I could search, or I could just sign in from the homepage. So that is also helps in a scale. scaling a framework that you're not going to write again a new method on the home page. You already know that while you're using an ID, you would get a hint that these are already existing methods. And it could also happen that even though in the later point of time, you could rename, enter a username or a password if you want to combine it all together. So let's look into the code here also. So if you could see here, this snippets here, what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to add some items to my cart, add a shipping address, add a payment instruction with a billing address, then submit an order and perform some set of assertions based on my order ID. So this is what is my, as a user, I'm performing a operation. This is what is the chain of responsibility. So shipping address is sending the responsibility to payment. After payment is done successfully, we are trying to submit an order. Let's look this into a code base. How does it looks like? So if you could notice here, the thing what I was talking here about, homepage.enter username. Again, you are talking about homepage.enter password and homepage.submit login. The reason behind this enter username is returning a void. If it returns a homepage, and if I just return this, and if I go back here, I would not use this, right? I would just use homepage.enter username dot enter password. Now what else I have? I could just see it. I don't have anything because this password is still returning a word. Let's return it also to the home page, as we are still on the home page where I'm entering a password and no user actions and invocation have happened. Now, what does it do? Submit login. So you could see your invocation is simpler, the code is prettier, it is more readable, and now you could also see here, like the enter password, what are the different other methods I have on the home page. I have a journey details, I can search for one-way journey, I can enter a journey details without page factory, I can search for the journey. I can enter a destination. So there are n number of methods, what all there are in there, and you would know what you could invoke it. And that is again like if you're writing a new test classes or new tests, it will just help you in chaining the methods and you could perform the respective action based on it. You don't have to write a new methods or a new class altogether. That's the beauty of the chain of invocation. This is one of the one which I liked it to make it like the code more pretty. As Srijit was mentioning page factory. So page factory, if we say it's an extension of the page object model. So what does page factory does and how does it helps? So it encapsulates like when you are identifying your element, it finds it by a find by annotation, and as a user you would just do like send username, send keys, and you would not think of what is the locator behind it, and it dynamically locates the element on a page. It again hides the complexity from an end user perspective, helps in readability, and helps in finding the attributes by a find by annotation and init with annotation. So let's have a look into the snippet here again. So we are again going to look into a journey. So today we'll be mostly talking around the journey as we are traveling less, but let's plan for our future travels. So it's what I'm going to do here is I'm trying to on a home page, I'm trying to enter a journey details. Having said that, on a page factory, it will encapsulate and use a find by annotation to find any of my web element, right? So there are two parts of it here itself. Like if you could see this part, This is where I'm finding my attribute based on some locators, and then driver is finding that element and you are sending your keys. While this is for my origin, while for my arrival, if we see, this is what my find by annotation is. And for me, it is very easy to figure it out as an end user, what am I doing in my test? And what is getting, like what are you performing in operations? Without knowing whether it's a CSS selector or whether it is an ID or whether it's an XML, right? So you're pretty much clear on what actions as a user you are performing, irrespective of knowing that what you are doing. So this could be just being like, if I want to implement this also as a page factory, my input would look like departure dot send keys. So departure city input dot send keys. What would be? It's a departure city, or it's a origin city, as if you could see that this is what the variable is. So this would be just my two lines of codes while I'm trying to enter a journey details. So pretty much readable. We are just sending a keys, and underneath we know that it has been instantiated by an ID or a find by annotation. Now, since we are here on the IDs, let's also touch base upon like what is our element locators. So some people find it, so how would you define your locators, identifiers? So some people find it easy to put in the same pages. For some people, it's more like, let's have a separate locator classes. In my opinion, I prefer keeping the locators in the pages so I could relate it and go to the where the locators are and what their find it, what their attributes are. As when we were just debugging this, you would have seen that I don't have to go to a separate class to figure it out where and what my locators are. Cool. So that was more on the page factory. Last but not the least, this is something is the data design. Like, why would I need to think about designing a data in a manner when I'm designing my framework? Why would I need to think of separation of data and a test code? To reduce the duplications? So in our assignment, there was one of the requirements where for a user of family login, you could have a family login with the same mobile number, but your different unique PAN number, or you could relate with your SSN number. So how would you maintain the uniqueness of data? How would you maintain the integrity of your data? And how would you make sure that once you have written your test, however times you want to run it, you're not stopping it just because of the data failure. So suppose I'm creating a username Varuna and I'm creating a username some ABC, and both have a different PAN. So how would you randomize your data? And nevertheless, how would you handle your nested data? For a user, I have an address, I have a different payment methods. How would you structure your data? So there are different ways like to handle those data in your test automation framework. Some people would like to keep it in a CSV. Some people would like to put it in your test class itself. And some would prefer it putting in a separate classes altogether. You would have also noticed like it's a pattern like what you're following in your team. Some people keep constants in one separate file. Some people keep constants in your error message.constants file. So it's a different ways to pass the test data and what you intended. In my opinion, I keep the data in a separate class altogether, but it should be accessible from my ID so I could see what the data is and where the data is, and what could be the different failures if something it occurs due to data. The most important part here is how would you randomize your data and how would you mimic it to the real world data. That is something like people invest a lot while they are defining a big complex enterprise modernization frameworks to implementing, mimicking real-time data and then randomizing it while your tests are running. So I should not be worried of that my test will fail just because of data, or it will fail if some environment has changed, and then again just because of the data. So that's where the data plays a really very important. It's your seed to your test. Like what are you seeding to your test is where you design your data. And this is where the people invest a lot of time and efforts eventually to make it your framework more scalable. Now, let's look into small snippets of the data, like how would you have your data here. So suppose I would like to do some assertions on the invalid results, like my search origin city name should be invalid if it is someone has passed it null or an empty. What would it happen? And for that, if you noticed, I have created a separate data class. Here again, the naming is not the right one. It should be somewhere search data, test data. That is also the convention we should be following here. So now if I go here on login test data, and if you go back and see what the test data is, here it is more like an invalid origin city name destination. And it could be an empty and a null. So here you are handling your data. And tomorrow if someone comes and say that my city name should not have any numbers. So that would also be one place for me to add it here, that what I want to add here in my origin city name. So that way you could handle your data. It's not only the data that you have to handle it for your invalid scenarios, but also for the valid ones. Like if you want to test your framework for a different username, for a different types of payments, or different type of cities, or an address. So all these things, or nevertheless, this is one classic example, like how would you want to test your invalid mobile numbers test data? What would it would be prefixed it? And this helps really when you have your projects or your product application or test which is being supported throughout the globe, what you are supporting and what you are not supporting. So that's also one part of it to test your test data. Keep your data closer to your test. It's always good to have it within the same ID and the structure so the debugging becomes easier. And the format is something that completely depends on you, whether you want a CSV or an XML or some markdown, or if you want it in your hash map. So nothing is like a good or a best here. It depends on the team you're in, and it depends on the application under a test. Having said that, let's identify what's the patterns which we covered while we were navigating through the page objects. Let's look into it. What would you think of while we are navigating through this course? What would you think of the different advantages of a design pattern? So the most important part here is the ownership. Like you know what my page is going to own, what my test class is going to own, what my test data is going to own, what my locators are going to own. So everyone has their own responsibility. So they are autonomous, but they are aligned. So it's autonomous, but still aligned. One place to modify. If tomorrow someone comes and asks me, hey, could you please add this also in your test scenarios? It's just a one place I need to change, whether it's a data or a locator, and I don't have to worry about it. And my test implementation should take care of it. The beautiful part of test design patterns, we discussed it earlier, it's also a platform and the languaging. You know the concepts of the pattern, you could apply to any language from Java to Python to anything. It enhances the reliability, like how reliable your tests are. Sometimes we have seen that we spend a lot of time in fixing the flaky test instead of writing the new test or enhancing our framework. So it helps in enhancing your reliability. You're reliable. Like if I run my test even dozens of time in a day, it should not fail until unless there is some application change that needs some testing. Save time and efforts eventually. In start, you need to put a lot of efforts and time to design your framework, but eventually it helps in maintaining while when you're scaling. So now it completely depends on you whether you would want to use the patterns or not, and it depends on your context. It's not something that someone has said that it is cool, so we should be using it. If you are not using it, it's not the use case which you are being bothered about. So that's all I had. I'm open for any questions.
Thank you, Varuna. Yeah, that was very interesting for me. I really didn't know about these test designs until your talk, so thank you very much. So now if anyone have any question to Varuna, just raise your hand and you can share this question with us.
Hello, Varuna. Thank you. It was very interesting, as Ursula said. Do you recommend any book to follow to learn more about these patterns, design patterns applied to test automation?
So if you want to know more into deep dive, Gang of Four is somewhere where the pattern started it. So get the concepts from there and apply it based on what you have been applicable to your automation purpose.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so there is a question from Srijit, how to dynamically change the object property dynamically in a page factory model. So while you're identifying your locators, that point of time only you could parameterize those locators, and based on your inputs, that could be a dynamically changed. Like suppose you have a username 1 as one locator and a username 2 as a different locator. So you would always pass not a username 1 as a locator. 1 and 2 would be your parameters. So that way your property of your object will change dynamically.
Well, thank you all very much for this time to join us. And thank you, Varuna, for sharing your knowledge with us in TestingUy.
Thanks everyone. Thanks for joining.
Thank
See you.
Thank
you.
you.